Hello everyone and welcome to Not Another Whiskey Podcast. If you guys are looking for a podcast with in-depth whiskey news, long drawn-out tasting notes and backward opinions on how whiskey should be drunk, then you've definitely come to the wrong place. I'm Mitch Beshard, your co-host.
And I am Daz Haldane, and between us we have 30 years of experience in the whiskey industry. Mitch, of course, with a little bit more than me.
So we thought we'd share our experience and passion with you guys and hopefully give you a laugh on the way, talking about some of our amazing experiences within whiskey, interesting whiskey facts interwoven with our diamond banter. Right, Daz?
Indeed. It's the podcast where we plan to give you guys the insider's look into the fascinating world of whiskey and a few nuggets from our experiences. And of course, we have worked for some of the biggest names in whiskey, so we do have the inside track and we're going to share it with you here.
So we're going to kick off this first episode with some whiskey tales from our experiences as brand ambassadors and stories we've heard from people that have been in the industry way longer than us.
Grab a dram, sit back and enjoy as Mitch and I gas away about all these wonderful things from our industry.
So firstly, thank you to everyone for tuning in to our first attempt at this. Daz, we just told everyone we're these experienced guys within the whiskey industry, so I think we need to back that up, right? So let's start off with your amazing career to date. Tell everyone what you've done.
I started actually working in bars and restaurants. My dad was a submariner. He was a cook on the submarines, so he was basically like a shite version of Steven Seagal. And what we then did is obviously worked in restaurants, went into bars, and through that, I managed to end up working with Diageo, which is where Mitch and I met for the first time, actually. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. I spent 5 years there, 5 years then with Edrington, Highland Park and Macallan. And then the last 5 years working for White & Mackay, mainly across Dalmore, Jura, Fetter, Cairn and Tam Lafulin. So 15 years has whizzed past so quickly in the whiskey industry. But it has been, well, listen, it's been good. There might have been a few whiskies along the way, Mitch.
No, it's cool, mate. I mean, I remember going back to my hospitality days as well when we used to hang about together in bars. I was in Browns. I used to come in at Tonic after my shift and used to help me out with a few after-drink cocktails. But yeah, man, like you said, I was the same as you. I jumped into Diageo around about the same time. I was a little bit before you, there for 5 years. And then I went off to the US of A with William Grant & Sons to become their Glenfiddich ambassador, looking after the West Coast and then taking over the entire country. I was their national ambassador. So I've been, again, the same as you, Daz, 15 years as a whiskey ambassador. Now got my own company, doing experiences, consultancy, doing the whole thing. So going alone, which is interesting, but also fucking scary. But good times though, good times. What we wanted to do with this first episode was talk to you guys about our personal experiences, you know, some of our incredible stories that we've had within our over 30 years within the whiskey experience, right? And also talk to you guys about some of these great stories that we've heard from these guys that we've been lucky enough to work with, some of these legends within the whiskey industry that have really dedicated their whole life to the whiskey world. So Daz, what's yours, man? What if you were to you know, you're now granddad, you're sitting down,
right.
You've got your grandson on the knee, and the grandson says, so granddad, what did you do back in your whiskey days? What one story are you going to tell them?
One of the ones that stands out for me was it was actually just as I was finishing with Diageo and I was going over to work at Highland Park. And I was speaking to you at the same time, Mitch. And I remember you were already at Grant's over in America, if you remember. And it got towards the end of the year. And I think it was about November, December time. And I had been successful with my first interview. And I went back in to do my second interview for the Highland Park job to be their global brand ambassador. And that was a big step for me, you know, and it was the first time really I would go straight into only talking about whiskey. So no cocktail stuff, no gins and rums and tequilas and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd set my sights on it and I was really, really keen to do it. And you'll know Jerry Tosh from, you know, the travels when he was at Highland Park back in the day. he was their ambassador for years, became their marketing guy, went over to the dark side, didn't he? So he was interviewing me for my job at Highland Park, him and a girl called Susie Davidson. So I'm in the room and they'd asked me to tell them a story or share something that I was very passionate about. So it was an early morning meeting and I made them breakfast, right? So I took in some nice croissants. I made them some lovely coffee and I made
Sweeten them up, mate.
Mate, listen, the key to this is obviously fill them up, make them feel good, and then get out of there, hopefully get the job. So I've gone in and we've done the breakfast thing and I've served it all up. I did the coffee in these Japanese coffee siphons where you heat it up from the bottom.
Yeah.
And the vacuum sucks the water up. It brews the coffee as it cools. It then passes back through. And you need a little light fire to get this coffee boiling and get the water heating away. So I used this little heater and it was a paraffin one. Right. So it's smoking away. I've lit it in the offices and it starts bellowing out all this smoke. And I wasn't quite sure if it was meant to do that or not. So anyway, I've created a bit of a mess. Anyway, I've made them their coffee and they're giggling away. And my story was, that it was a great way to serve a simple thing. It's about the ritual and the experience, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I sat down and I felt like it went quite well. They started asking me normal interview questions kind of after that. Anyway, I felt good. I was confident. If I didn't get the job, fair enough, but I thought I'd put myself across as well as I could. So as I'm walking out the room, I've said goodbye to Jerry and Susie. I'm at the door and Jerry turns around to me and says, Darryl. And I was like, yeah. He's like, where are you going after this? And I was like, I'm just going to get in the car and go home. And he says, cool. You might want to wash that soot off your face before you go home. Said,
no way.
What do you mean? And he was like, well, just, when you did that coffee at the start of the interview, you've touched your face quite a few times. You might want to just go and wash it off before you go home. And I went into the bathroom and I had literally put soot all over my face because I was clearly nervous in the interview. I must have been touching my face or something. I looked like an American footballer, with all the chalk marks on my face and stuff. Unbelievable, man. So anyway,
you still got the job.
I got the job, thankfully. And I think I got it more out of sympathy than anything else, and Jerry's a master of the Quake. He's the director of private client over at White & Mackay now. And I see him fairly regularly and he's sure to make sure I don't forget that,
Mate, that's big shoes to fill, but you did it well, mate.
I did all right. I always remember you telling me actually back in the day that you were a big fan of Highland Park 18. So, it's the first time I've ever valued your opinion, probably the last time, to be fair.
Yeah, fair enough, mate. Fair enough. Yeah, I always think it's funny going in for these interviews. I remember I got to the stage with, William Grant and Sons where I was, and you'll probably be the same now, where you're starting to interview all these guys and you kind of see it, right? And a lot of the time it's bartenders coming in that want to move from that bartending world to the ambassador world. And it's, I remember that from our Diageo days. I remember my interview for Diageo was literally in the Balmoral Hotel over 4 pints of Guinness and about 10 Regal King size with Phil Keane. And then, we went out and got messed up in Edinburgh afterwards. And that was my job interview for that role. Yeah.
What about you, man? I mean, there must be, certainly with Grants and obviously working in the States for as long as you did, you must have a few funny stories from those times.
Yeah, I think it's not so much funny. It's more like surreal, the story that I've got. And I still to this day do not ever think I'm going to beat this for like an amazing whiskey day. I mean, it was like, I remember waking up the next day and just thinking, did that actually happen? So it was 2013. And I think it might have been the first ever Nth whiskey show in Las Vegas
just
that I attended.
Yeah,
it just happened last week. But yeah, this was the first ever one. And what we did with Glenfiddich was we did this high end or high roller, as they called it, tasting, where we rented out 5 helicopters and flew everyone into the Grand Canyon. And I'm not talking like we just landed by the side of the Grand Canyon. We actually landed in the Grand Canyon with these 5 helicopters, did a tasting of Glenfiddich 30, 40 and 50-year-old. So as if that wasn't enough, right? That's an amazing fucking day by itself. Rewind to about a week before I did that, I had an email from Calvin Harris's manager. And he's like, oh, you know, Calvin is a massive fan of Glenfiddich 21-year-old. That's what he always asks for as his rider, blah, blah, blah. So we start talking. So I said to the manager that we're doing this helicopter ride, and does Calvin want to come along? He's like, nah, he's shit scared of flying. So there's no way you're going to get him on a helicopter. But he would like to invite you to his gig he's doing that night. And it was in the Win. So anyway, I made sure that I kept some of the 50-year-old back for Calvin Harris that night. I end up meeting him just before he's about to go on for his gig. Pour him a little bit of 50-year-old. We drink a little bit of 50-year-old, and then he's like, right, come on, then come with me. And I'm like, what? He's like, hey, you're coming at the gig, right? So I walk literally not on stage, but kind of like back of stage with Calvin Harris, and I'm standing right behind him with this glass of Glenfiddich 50-year-old, and he's turning around to me. He's like, this is all right, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, man, this is pretty fucking cool. So, I mean, you know, for a day that cannot be beat within being a being a whiskey ambassador, I think that is going to top it. Unless I go to the moon or do something like that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I think quite a lot of people might have the impression that happens every day for a brand ambassador. And even on a brand as big as Glenfiddich in a market like the States, you know, even that's still quite a rare kind of once in a career type gig, you know?
Ah, mate, it was incredible. I mean, you know, I was with Ian Miller as well at the time. He's an absolute, you know, whiskey legend, global ambassador for Glenfiddich at the time. And he still says to this day that was the most amazing day he's ever had. You know, he didn't even know who Calvin Harris was. Who's this guy?
No.
And then we're in a nightclub, and I always remember this. We're in the nightclub, and Calvin gave us like a whole table that was just jam-packed with like vodka Red Bulls and stuff. And Ian Miller is getting tucked into the vodka Red Bulls. He didn't sleep for the next like 4 days. He's like, I've never had that stuff before. I'm never doing it again.
Yeah. But I love that. There's that lovely element of humility, I think, especially from people that live on site at distilleries and work at these distilleries and things like that. And I'll never forget when the Highlands and Islands Council used to pay for certain acts to travel around the islands to come and visit, you know, the smaller populations and things, because they would never have the pool, you know, for big DJs and big acts and things like that. So in Orkney, Mumford and Sons had agreed to come up to St. Magnus Cathedral and play a gig up there. So randomly through one of the connections, they ended up doing a tour of Highland Park Distillery. And Pat Retson it was. Pat's retired now, but Pat was wonderful. She worked at Highland Park for a very long time, and she looked after them, took them around the distillery for a tour, and they end up in one of the tasting rooms upstairs. And the guys have just sort of pulled, I think there was a few guitars up there, just picked a few instruments and just started strumming away and gassing away, chatting to Pat and all that kind of stuff. So they had said to Pat, look, if you're available tonight, just pop down and come and see us. Now, I don't think Pat fully appreciated just who they were. And Pat turns it down politely and says she can't because she's got to sort her horse out. She looks after her horse. So she was busy doing that in you know, whatever time of the evening, 7 at night or something. Pat's got a son and a daughter, and her son's at home, was at home at the time. So Pat goes home, and you know, his son asks, "How was your day, Mum?" "Oh, all good, you know." "Oh yeah, fine, no bad, not bad. We had these guys were here from, I think they're playing at the St. Magnus Cathedral tonight. They said I should pop down, but I didn't really fancy it." And the son's obviously looking at her going, "That's Mumford and Sons. Are you joking? Are you actually joking?" She said, "Well, I never thought, I didn't know who they were." And he's obviously raging, trying to get tickets, probably not got them. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, I love that. Like, it doesn't really matter. You know, you turn up at the door, you could be the biggest celebrity in the world, or you know, just normal guy like us walking off the street. And I think most of these distilleries would probably treat you quite similarly. You know, it's brilliant. I love that.
A lot of these guys, you know, that are in the whiskey industry that are absolute legends are just so humble. I mean, for me, David Stewart's the classic example of that with Balvenie, you know. Right, so anyway, let's get on to one of the sections we're going to do in this podcast.
What's Daz and Mitch drinking this week?
So every episode, we're going to be drinking something, obviously, because it's a whiskey podcast, and it'd be pretty shit if we weren't drinking anything. So Daz, what are we going to be drinking this week?
All right, well, many years ago, Mitch, when you and I started working together, we would fall out on a regular basis about what was better. Now, you at the time were a big Lagavulin fan. Mm-hmm. I wasn't as big a fan of Lagavulin as you were. My preference always from the Diageo fold was Talisker. Love that whiskey. Beautiful stuff. I think it's a great representation of where it comes from. I think style-wise, I could pick it out. You could put 100 whiskies in front of me, I know I could pick out
Yeah.
any of the Taliskers, well, most of them. So I thought we would go to Talisker, up to the Isle of Skye, and try this wonderful whiskey. You have, what have you got? Ooh.
I have got the Talisker Sky, actually, so I spanked all my Talisker a while ago for my Diageo days. I remember having quite a few bottles of the 25-year-old. And to be honest with you, I haven't drunk Talisker for a while. I remember the last time I did it, we did a blind tasting. And to your point, I picked it out straight away. And I forgot how fucking good this stuff is, you know what I mean? So I saw Talisker Sky the other day. And I was like, I haven't tried that before. Which is a no age statement, but it's a little bit higher ABV than the normal 10-year-old. So we got 45.8% ABV on it. I always get this pepperiness with Talisker that comes through.
Yeah, no, I agree. The guys, I always remember doing tastings with it. We used to always say it was kind of red hot chili peppers, you know, it's got that lovely little bit of spice, but there's also that lovely element of kind of brininess, seaweedy kind of quality as well, which leads into a touch of sweetness, bitter orange even. And I find that in almost every Talisker, even the old stuff, you go right up to your 25s and things like that. And there's usually that combination of flavors in there, which is why I do think it is one of the more distinctive whiskies. Also, remember, there aren't that many whiskies in that medium peated area. You know, when you talk about Ardbegs and Lafroigs and Lagavulins, they're very peaty, Kalilas and stuff. They're right up there at the top. And then you come right back down towards the bottom where you've maybe got your Highland Parks and things, Jura probably as well, into that kind of bottom pile. And then in the middle, Springbank, Talisker, there's very few, you know, in that middle, that kind of middle peat. But so I think Talisker kind of owns that little space. I think it's a really great place to enjoy a whiskey either early on or even as a nightcap late at night. I think it's just got that lovely versatility. I'm a bit posher than you, Mitch. I've actually got the Talisker 2020 special releases, 8-year-old. And I know, how fancy. This is actually finished in a pot still rum cask, this one as well, which is quite cool. And I sway, I'm not convinced fully on rum casks. I like some and I don't like others. But this was decent, and it's coming in as well at 57.9%. So it's full strength. What I love about this, and it's often what I prefer in a Talisker, is young Talisker. I think is best. 8-year-old, 9-year-old Taliskers always for me are the best examples of this distillery. Higher strength, and that little bit of rum just gives it a wee twist. That's all. It's a little bit bitter on the finish, nice cinnamon notes, bit spicy, and a little bit of apricot right in the middle of the palate, which is really, really pleasant. So, not bad price. I think this comes in about 80 quid, 90 quid.
Yeah, I mean, that Talisker Sky, I picked that up the other day. It was on sale, 25 quid. 25 quid for a bottle of Talisker? You can't beat that, right? I think I'm going to give myself one of these. But no, it's a beautiful dram and an amazing place to go. You and I went up there a few times, up to the distillery on Skye before it became a tourist trap, which it is a little bit now. I remember, fond memories of going up there by sailboat a couple of times with the malts cruise, and then once by helicopter. Dude, that was awesome. Landed at Talisker in a helicopter. Everyone thought I was a celebrity, came rushing over, saw me jumping out and was like, oh, who's this guy? Pfft, bullshit.
What is it with you and helicopters?
Oh, mate, love it. Love a helicopter.
But I think, actually, I haven't been, I don't think I've been to Talisker for about 8 years, 9 years.
Mate, I'm the same. Yeah, at least 10 years. At least 10 years for me. So it'd be interesting to go back and see what's going on. And I notice as well that they still have on the label the only distillery in Skye. They need to change that now.
They need to update that. Absolutely. So Torvig has opened within the last 6 months. Was it just before Christmas? I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're putting out liquid already, so
they released. That's what I mean. So they released their malt whiskey just within the last 6 months. They released it, didn't they? So the distillery's been there for a good 3 or 4 years now. But that's actually a great excuse for us to get in the car, get up to Skye, and go and check out Torvig, but also go back to Talisker for the first time in 10 years. I didn't realize this, but Talisker, Skye, the island itself, second most visited place in Scotland now, behind Edinburgh.
It's time for Mitch and Daz's interesting Scotch whisky facts that definitely won't get you laid.
All right, So I love that jingle, man. That's awesome. So I think the whole idea of this podcast is, right, we don't want to get geeky. We don't want to get like super nerdy with you guys. I think we will do that in a couple of episodes. We'll maybe go into a little bit of kind of whiskey geekery and get there, but maybe, 1 in 5 of them, guys. We're going to keep the rest of this all super light, just stories, interesting little nuggets for you. But one of the things that we wanted to do in this section was just talk about some interesting facts with regards to Scotch whiskey.
Brilliant. What have you
got? What are they?
What's it?
All right, so here we go. 36 bottles of Scotch whiskey are shipped from the UK to 166 markets around the world each second, ladies and gentlemen. That is insane. Laid end to end, those bottles would stretch 342,000 kilometers. That's 90% of the distance to the moon. Scotch whiskey exports are worth £3.8 billion. So in 2019, Scotch whiskey accounted for 75% of Scottish food and drink exports. So there you go. The last fact that is definitely not going to get you laid would be that more than 10,000 people are directly employed in the Scotch whiskey industry in Scotland. That equates to over 40,000 jobs across the UK, which are supported by the industry. So yeah, 40,000 jobs. Obviously, that includes people like brand ambassadors, all the marketing guys and all that kind of stuff. So there you go. Interesting Scotch whiskey facts that will not get you laid. Don't tell any of those facts in a bar. It's not gonna work for you.
It's not. Can we have another whiskey?
Right, absolutely. Okay, I'm never going to say no to that. All right, so I mean, Daz, here's the thing, right? Within our 30 years combined, we've met some incredible whiskey legends. Talking about guys that have dedicated their entire life to whiskey. You've been lucky enough to hang out with Richard Patterson, or Ricky P, as I like to call him. Yep. He's got 50 years of experience within Dalmore as their master blender. I was recently interviewing Dennis McBain, one of the legends that was a coppersmith for Glenfiddich and Balvenie, that's got 63 years experience, and he's still there right now. So these guys have got some incredible stories that we've picked up over our time hanging out with them. So what's your best one that you've heard?
I mean, there's billions of stories about these guys in particular. The great thing is they traveled a lot. They went out to countries like Taiwan and China, America, really when malt whiskey was in its infancy. And I think a lot of people forget that, and you talk about interesting facts about whiskey, that only 8% of whiskey sold is malt whiskey and still around 92% is blends. And I think for us who consume whiskey and talk about whiskey all the time, it's easy to forget that, because so much of our time is spent dedicated on malt whiskey, right?
Yeah.
And so these guys helped build that in really early days, and it's brilliant. And do you know, I'm not going to share a story from Richard's past necessarily. I'm just going to share an experience that I had with him that really just kind of made me chuckle and gave me a wee smile, because he's a flamboyant, charismatic character. He's a Trojan, really. He works so hard. You go into the office where our sample room is. If you go there at 7 a.m, Richard will be there before you. He's already in, and he'll never leave before you. He's kind of got that mentality. He's in working hard all the time, and he's a very busy guy, right? So through this whole COVID scenario, we've ended up doing a lot of this, and I've spent quite a lot of time with Richard on Teams and Zoom and all that kind of stuff. And his enthusiasm and charisma is not softened by this media. He maybe comes to life even more because you're getting him in his natural habitat back home, or in the sample room. But one day, I've got 2 wee ones, and through COVID, I was homeschooling and working at the same time, and I've got this weekly call with Richard, and we're on this thing, and my little man is destroying the living room. And I had to say to Richard, I was like, Richard, just give me a couple of minutes to sort this out. And he's so patient, and this is there's a side to Richard that maybe not everybody sees, is just how much of a people person he is. He really cares a lot about people, he's very sensitive in that way. So anyway, I get him like 5 minutes through to the living room. The wee man's destroying the place. and I managed to sort him out. I think I just gave him a bag of sweets and told him to be quiet, put a movie on, classic, terrible parenting. Anyway, I've managed to settle him down, and I come back through to the kitchen, and Molly, my little girl, who's a wee bit older, she's 8, she's sat at my laptop having a full-blown conversation with Richard Patterson, right? And I'm just sort of like, what's going on here? And he's like, so Molly, how are you? How's it going? How's your homeschooling going? And what have you got around you? And she's like, oh, my dad's coffee cup or something like that. And he's like, right, well, have a smell of that. What does it smell like? And he's got her literally doing a nosing of my coffee cup. And he's like, what do you smell? Oh, you're quite good at that, And here's a guy that's probably got 20 meetings in his diary that day. And I'm one of these wee guys that's just trying to steal information from him. And he's given me the time. Not only is he giving me the time, when I'm away sorting the kids out, he's got the patience to sit and have a wonderful conversation with wee Molly. And I just kind of left it for a minute, let them carry on, and then went back in and we finished what we had to do. But there's a side to people like that a lot of people don't get to see. Everybody knows Richard. Everybody knows who he is, and they've seen him at whiskey shows and events and stuff. I don't know how many people have got that close to him to actually see the other side of him, which is quite a very nice, very sensitive, very kind of caring guy. And I must say, working with him, he's very similar with us. He gives us so much time, and very appreciative of it. And yeah, it was funny, man. Molly talks about him all the time. She's drawn him pictures and all sorts of stuff.
No way. That's brilliant.
It's class, like.
Love that. That's such a cool story. Yeah, and I remember, I don't think it was like that back in our Diageo days. I don't think we had that contact with the makers of the whiskey as much. I think for me, that definitely changed when I moved to William Grant & Sons, and suddenly I'd get, an email, I'd email David Stewart or Brian Kinsman and get a reply within 10 minutes, and phone them up whenever I wanted to ask questions, which it's incredible, right? I mean, you think about these guys, they are so busy, but they have the time to do that, which is incredible. So my story, I'm going to mention someone that I mentioned already. So Dennis McBain, who, I'm very pally with. Absolutely love Dennis. Got so much time for him. I still spend a lot of time up in Speyside. I've got a house up there. So I was recently interviewing him, and he told me he actually told me this story a while ago, and it relates back to, the old days of the excise officers in the distilleries, right? And he remembers it very well. And he was like, most of the guys were great. I got on with them really well. And he recalls one of these days when they were at Balvenie, and the spirit safe, the window at the front had cracked, right? Now, for anyone that's been to Balvenie, you'll know that when you go to see the spirits, when you go into the still house, you actually look down on the stills and the steps that comes up, and it comes up to the spirit safe. So this window had cracked on the spirit safe, and what they had to do was replace it. They got a guy in, but when they got the guy in to replace the glass, they said to him, can you make this 2 inches shorter on each side? The reason was they could then push the glass to the side, pop in a hose, and steal the new make spirit from straight off the still before it went down into the spirit safe. Absolutely incredible. And supposedly they got away with this for years. The only reason they got found out was because the excise officer was walking up the steps from the still house, tripped on the final step, and put his hand on the glass to steady himself and moved the glass. And obviously him seeing that, he's like, guys, I'm not happy about that. We need to get this fixed, get that replaced ASAP. So no one actually ever got caught. But it just shows you what I love is all these stories that I've heard from these old boys back in the days on how they, not necessarily them, but how people used to steal whiskey, and how rife it was in distilleries.
It was very rife. I definitely know that from, certainly I remember up in Orkney, I used to go up and speak to the distillery guys a lot there, and they've replaced them all now, I think. But they had old glass panels in the warehouse roofs. Most distilleries had the same, little skylights. And these were held in by lead. And what would often happen is the guys would leave a cask underneath the skylight with the bung out overnight, and they would go up onto the roofs, and they would peel the lead back from the glass panes, take the glass away, and drop dogs down into the casks, and then get the dog back up, put the pane back in.
Explain to everyone what a dog is. We don't mean a real life dog.
Sorry, not a pooch. No, not a pet. A dog's a little cup, I suppose, a little copper cup that's cylindrical, and it's perfect for dropping into casks. And obviously, as it submerges, it fills up, and then when you whip it out of the cask and pull it up through those windows, you would end up with a lovely litre or two of free whiskey. And it's well known at night, certainly up there, and I'm sure at many other distilleries, that's how they would get their reasonable, what they felt was their reasonable share of their stocks, that they would go home and sip away on. But it's very common, these stories of they would find, I don't know if you heard about this, but quite often a cask, if it was found half empty or almost empty, they would roll it around and you would hear a bit of a clunk, ka-clunk, ka-clunk as they rolled it in the warehouse, and they would find mayonnaise, glass jars and stuff like that. They'd obviously try to get in and pull out all sorts of things like that they would find, It's funny.
It's funny, mate. Absolutely. The best story, I think, one of the best stories I heard was actually, again, going back to our Diageo days, when we had to do all that in-store sampling. Remember that in Waitrose?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Brutal.
Yeah.
I think you loved it, but
I actually did enjoy it. Yeah.
But I remember just by total coincidence, I ran into this guy and started chatting to him, and he was the old distillery manager of one of the distilleries you currently look after up at Jura. And he told me this great story. He was like, we used to roll out the casks to put onto the pier. We left them overnight for them to come and pick it up the next day, right? And he said he used to get these calls like once a month from the mainland saying like, why are you guys only filling some of the casks half full? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like we fill right the way to the brim every time. He then worked out it was only during the full moon when the tide was at the highest. So therefore the water was like, right underneath the pier, and the locals were going in with a boat underneath, drilling into the casks, taking half of it out and then bunging it back up again, sealing it back up again. So they didn't empty the cask completely, just half of it. But only during full moon, because that's the only time they could get the boats high enough into the pier.
That's so funny. Yeah. Brilliant.
Incredible.
I love that.
Incredible.
Daz and Mitch's Whiskey News of the Week.
All right, so in this section, we're going to talk about just briefly things that have caught our eye within the whiskey world.
Big news from Glenmorangie. I think this is a first in malt whiskey. It's certainly not in blends. I think a lot of blends have been created to make great drinks, highballs and cocktails and things like that. But Glenfiddich X, not Glenfiddich. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh.
Edit that out, mate.
Edit that out. Glenmorangie X has been designed using, the initial maturation for Glenmorangie usually is ex-bourbon casks anyway. Big, tall giraffe neck stills, very light floral kind of spirit. Initial maturation in bourbon. And then what they're doing is they're putting it into some recharred casks. So they're looking just for that little extra oomph from the oak to come through. And it's quite interesting. So a slightly richer version of Glenmorangie, designed specifically for mixing. Now, it's at 40%. So what's fascinating about this is not for the bartender, the professional. It's for the at-home cocktail enthusiast. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a cocktail for, date night, you want to have a cocktail for barbecue or anything like that, that really is what Glenmorangie X has been designed for. So I think they've come up with some drinks that people can make at home using that particular whiskey. So it's quite new territory. And Mitch, I think we're going to have a chat about whiskey and cocktails at some point through this podcast as well.
That's going to be one of the episodes for sure.
Yeah, and it's where we've come from as well. Our background, obviously, being in hospitality, it's something we've always kind of been around as well. So yeah, that's big news from Glenmorangie.
I think it's big in that to put that on a label, as in, it's made for mixing on a single malt Scotch whiskey label. That's a ballsy move. I'm really loving what Glenmorangie's doing right now. I thought their last advert that they did was just superb. Cool, That was like bringing Scotch whiskey into the modern world. And I think we've been doing that over the last 10 years or so. But something like that really pushes it into this world that we're living in right now. And we're slowly getting rid of this, stigmatism. I suppose you could say that it's an old man's drink. It's fusty, it's dusty. Thank fuck. We're shaking that image off, which is good to see. The only thing so I love it. But the only thing I do not like when I read about this is, I think it is said here to quote unquote, this whiskey will bring your drink the X factor. Like, Come on, guys, that's a shit soundbite. I love Dr. Bill. I hope that wasn't Dr. Bill that said that.
He will not have said that.
Mate, we need to get Dr. Bill on here at some point.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Big fan of Bill Lumsden. Let's get him on the show at some point. I think that's the great thing that we're going to do on this show as well. Obviously, Daz and I know a lot of people within the whiskey industry. We're going to do 3 of these ourselves, and then we're going to start bringing guests in from all around the world, that do jobs within the whiskey world, obviously. And it's not going to be your stuffy interviews. We're going to get them to talk about their life outside of whiskey, maybe get some juicy details off them and get them to open up a little bit.
That
maybe
sounds good. Yeah.
Get them drunk, mate.
Well, I don't know about getting them drunk, but they definitely need to bring us whiskey, mate. That's the best part about this. If we're bringing in people from different distilleries or different parts of the industry and stuff, they need to be sending us some samples. We can't have you going out to Tesco and buying your own bottles of whiskey, Mitch. Can't have that.
Agreed. Never happens anyway, mate. Never happens anyway. All right, so time for the final part of our podcast.
Guess the whiskey, 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 guess the whiskey.
This is the Guess the Whiskey part of the show. We will eventually do this as a little giveaway. What we want you guys to do here is guess the whiskey that we're talking about right now. I don't know. You can, I suppose, give the answer. How do you give an answer on a podcast? We've got no idea. Maybe just hit us up on Instagram, right?
Absolutely. At Daryl Haldane.
Whiskey_Mitch. Give us a shout. Let us know what you think it is. We'll give you a mention on the next one. So here is the clue as to what whiskey I'm talking about. So this whiskey is unpeated, but can be peated. Its name relates to a castle, and its bottle reflects the shape of its stills. So guys, if you do know what that is, drop us a message. Let us know. If you want to know what it is, listen to the next episode.
I hope you've enjoyed the first one. It's been a good giggle. It's great for Mitch and I to catch up and share a few stories from our experiences over the last 30 plus years, or combined years, certainly, within the industry. Check out the next one to get the answer. And you do get to win something, that's for sure. We don't know what yet. We'll figure that out.
A date night with Daz.
A date night with Daz. Oh, geez. Don't do that.
We're also going to talk about whiskey trails, whiskey festivals, what's going on, and our experiences there.
Absolutely. Right. So at the end of this week, it's Spirit of Speyside Festival, and that goes right the way through into next week. I'm actually heading up at the end of next week to Copper Brock, which I'm really looking forward to as well.
Yes.
I'm also hosting a couple of tastings for Spirit of Speyside with our good pal, Davey B, Mr. Broom. Then into the middle of May, we've got Highland Whisky Festival, which has been cancelled this year, but there'll be some tastings throughout the month which kind of recognise Highland Whisky Festival. It's a real shame on that festival because the North Highland Whisky Festival really was about celebrating these distilleries up by Dalmore, Glenmorangie, Old Pulteney and all that, because it's almost a region within itself. There's some amazing distilleries up on that north coast. And it got its first year underway. We did that physically and it was amazing. But sadly, the last 2 years have been cancelled through the coronavirus stuff. So yeah, we'll definitely recognise that. And I think Mitch will have to taste some lovely North Highland whiskies as we go through that. And then at the end of May into the start of June, you've got Fèis Isle. Fèis Isle, obviously the Islay Whisky Festival, but also does include Jura as well. So that's a really cool one. Again, we'll crack out a couple of bottles, do some tasting, see if we can get our hands on some of these lovely distillery exclusives as well. So yeah, lots happening over the next 4 to 5 weeks. And Mitch will make sure we check in and get a good scoop on what's happening at these festivals, some of the tastings and stuff that are going on, and make sure we get our hands on a few bottles.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan. All right, guys. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Slange.
Slange va.